All right, good morning. Hey kiddos, we're back. So I'm at school. I've just taught the Monday, this morning, Monday section of lecture, Monday morning. And others of you will be seeing me either on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So this is a continuation of the chapter, and I don't remember the number, the chapter covering the brain. So last time we had talked, you see I even have a model here, we had talked about the medulla oblongata, the pons, the midbrain in this area, and then we had said this region up in here was the diencephalon. And we had also talked about the cerebellum. What we're left with is the cerebrum. And this is the, higher portions of your brain. And they don't necessarily control all of the important living processes, but it's all of sort of the good stuff, if you will, advanced behaviors and that kind of thing that we're going to talk about when we talk about the cerebrum. So today's lecture, I think I labeled it the cerebrum and high thought. Yeah. So when we look at this thing, if you were to go to a Halloween party as a kid, you might have had some spaghetti sitting there and claimed it was brains. And why would that be? So it's because you have these grooves that are called gyri, and then the ridges are the gyri, and then you have the grooves that are sulci. And when you look at a human brain versus a sheep's brain, and we'll have a sheep's brain that we'll be looking at next week, when you look at a human brain versus a sheep's brain, you'll notice that the sulci are much deeper in the human. And it's because on the human we have this outer layer. The outer layer of the brain is what we call the cerebral cortex. And that is and sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the neocortex. And that is where we have a lot of neurons, the nuclei for the neurons, which allow us this more deep kinds of thoughts. When you look at this thing, you can see it's kind of divided up where you can see various parts. You can see we have this central sulcus right there, and that line is very important because that is what's going to separate the lobe at the front of your brain, the frontal lobe, from the parietal lobe. And then below we have another sulcus here that separates the temporal lobe. So we have 5 lobes, and we had said we have frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital here on the back, and then there's one that's hidden down inside of there. So if you had a brain and you could sort of pull it apart and look, you would see one inside of there that's called the insula. So we had said that this cerebrum allows us to have complex behaviors. So when we talk about each of these lobes that I just identified, we can give a function or, the kinds of things that are done in each of these different lobes. Now, the frontal lobe is going to be associated with voluntary movements. So you decide to do something. So when you do that, it's residence here, or it's generated from here in the frontal lobe. And if you sort of expand deciding to do something out, you can realize that that's where sort of your personality comes into play. So the voluntary decisions to do things that make up who you are, what kind of person you are, that would be in the frontal lobe. So we'd say personality resides there. Then we have this lobe that's behind the central sulcus here, that's on top of your brain, and that is the parietal lobe. And it is the primary sensory lobe. So somatosensory information, that's just sensing your body, it is going to make its way to that portion of your brain, the parietal lobe. Now, hearing and smell and learning and memory, they're going to be associated with the temporal lobe. And so what do we have left then? Vision. That's your occipital lobe. So the back of your brain, you're going to have vision. Now, inside of here, we had said we have this fifth cerebral lobe that's on the inside that's called the insula, and so when we talk about lobes, we're really talking about where cell bodies are. So we had said here on the surface of the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobe, we have cell bodies. Then if you go inside of here, you would find another lobe that's called the insula, which is where we have cell bodies, and they're going to be associated with visceral sensations, whether your stomach feels good or not, as well as plays a little bit of a role in understanding language and in taste. It's also in that location. Later on in this chapter, we will be looking at various locations on the brain, and you'll notice that gustation is going to be in this area and here, as well as what they call Wernicke's region, which is the understanding of language. So we have the insula that's inside of there. All right, so I'm going to keep on going. We're going to go to slide number 3. It's really title slide plus the second, one. Slide number 3, it's really only the second slide that has any information on it. When you are studying nervous tissue, we had said in the central nervous system, some neurons are myelinated and some are not. And what does that mean? That means that you have oligodendrites in the central nervous system that are wrapped around the axons of myelinated neurons. But then you have, in the central nervous system, you have other regions where you don't have myelin. And so when we talk about the regions with the oligodendrites, we call that white matter. And when we talk about the regions where the neurons do not have oligodendrites, the myelin-containing cells associated with them, these would be what we call gray matter. So the areas with the cell bodies and so forth, these would be what we call gray matter. And then we, in every case, and with all of these neurons, we're going to talk about them communicating, projecting somewhere, right? So when we talk about these fibers, where we have these neurons that are projecting, axons going here, there, everywhere, right? We can talk about different kinds of fibers. We were talking about how when you feel your toe, there's one neuron, the first order neuron, that goes into your spinal cord, and it communicates with a second order neuron that is going to extend all the way up through the spinal cord, through the medulla oblongata, through the pons, all the way up to this area right here. That's called the thalamus. And we had said the thalamus in last time's lecture, we said it is the gatekeeper for the cerebrum. So from the thalamus, you have fibers that project up to the cerebral cortex. So fibers, nerve pathways that extend in a superior to inferior or inferior to superior manner, up and down, so to speak, we're going to call these projection fibers. So we have projection fibers that are going to be moving up and down the central nervous system. We then have something called association fibers. And what you have is you have regions of the cortex, the cerebral cortex, that communicate with one another, this area to this area. And we have what we call association regions on the cerebral cortex. And so you have what we call association fibers, where you have communication between this part of the cortex and that part of the cortex. So it's going from one location to another on the surface of the brain. Those would be what we call association tracts. Now, we all know that we have a left side of our brain and a right side of our brain, right? And what we have is we have this structure right here in the middle. You see that right there? That is a pathway connecting the left and the right sides of your brain together. And that is called the corpus callosum. And the types of fibers that connect the right side of your brain with the left side of your brain are called commissural tracts. So the commissural tracts pass through this region of the brain from this side to that side, from this side to that side, through that area that we call the corpus callosum. And those kind of nerve pathways are what we call commissural. Projection, up and down, association, and side to side would be commissural. Be right back.